Thank you all for being here. One of the things that as we were preparing for this, Erin and I were talking about, this is a great topic for this time in history and this time in our year. We'll talk a little bit of the context of 2020 and why prioritizing your people is so critical, especially now. But this is a topic that Erin and I are very passionate about. Erin is a client of 3Box, but truly she's a friend and colleague of mine, and we talk a lot about how communication plays into a much bigger role in an organization, and specifically how it serves people. And so in this time, we're going to walk you through a bit of making the case of why investing in internal communications and employee engagement is important. Erin will give you a peek behind the curtain at JPI and show you how she and her team do things there. And then we'll give you some practical tips. It's really important to us that you're able to walk away from this next 50 minutes with something tangible that you can take back to your teams or to your organizations and start today. We think it's as simple as that. We want you to have a roadmap. Usually when I speak, I love the interaction and questions as we go. And so in a virtual format, I feel a little exposed in that I'm just going to go ahead and talk, and Erin will talk, and then I will talk, and then we will take questions. But we have reserved about 15 minutes on the back end to make sure that you have an opportunity to share, any challenges that you're having, any questions that might come up, or really just any observations that you have throughout. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with prioritizing your people. Let me make sure it's advancing. Sorry, technical issues. Okay. And Jeff has already given us such a gracious introduction. Thank you for having us. And we'll go ahead and skip through this slide, but I do want to just point out that if at any point in this session, you are tweeting, if you want to tag JPI Partners or 3Box Inc., please feel free to do so. We have teams who are behind the scenes and would love to chat with you along the way. So feel free to do that.
And tag North Dallas Chamber at NDCC as well. Excellent.
Okay. So as I mentioned, 2020 has been a unique year. We all have experienced some challenging times, maybe some exciting times even, and your employees are feeling it on either end of the spectrum. So as we were preparing, I wanted to really think about what's the data behind this? Why should you care about employee engagement and investing the time that it takes to communicate well with your people? And so we turned to Gallup, who you all, I'm sure, familiar with, this analytics and data firm that really is a thought leader in gathering trends and weighing in on what's happening in real time. Gallup has been measuring employee engagement for 20 years. Employee engagement, just to kind of set the tone or to define it, is really about how connected are your people to not only their job, but to your organization and to the mission of your business or nonprofit. So you can understand that employee engagement, we all know a disengaged employee, right? We know what that looks like. On the flip side, an engaged employee can be incredibly powerful for your teams and your organization. And so we went to Gallup and looked at, what are they seeing in this particular moment in time as compared to what they've surveyed in the past. And I thought this was really interesting. This was from an article on October 16th. Happy to share the link. It's full of good information, but this is very recent. They have been measuring quarterly what employee engagement is doing. And this quote says, employee engagement has been a steady metric without sharp ups and downs since Gallup began tracking it in 2000, with the exception of 2020. In this year, Gallup has seen the highest engagement rates ever in the history of them tracking this data, and they've also seen the lowest lows, all in a span of the past 10 months. That's an incredible kind of observation that typically employee engagement stays fairly consistent across the year. With 2020, it has been nothing but typical, which makes a lot of sense. Let's think about what your team members, your people have experienced and you have experienced this year. So in 2020, forgive me, let's start with beginning of the year. For Aaron and I, we started back, of course, if you're an international company, you knew about COVID, back in Q4 of 2019, right? So particularly those who have operations in Asia, this was a concern. You were, starting to watch this. For Aaron and I, who JPI, and she'll speak a little bit more about JPI and their presence, but JPI has residential communities in California. And so, with properties on the West Coast and also here in the central US, COVID-19 became something that we were talking about early in Q1 about how to respond to this, what the implications were going to be internally to the business and to their associates. So clearly, throughout this year, from March, when it really became big news here in the US, to the entire year, a global pandemic has affected all of us. And we'll talk about some of the ways that that's maybe impacted your employee engagement. Then as we got further into the year, over the summer, we had a significant national racial reckoning, right? Black Lives Matter became an incredibly strong movement, while diversity, equity, and inclusion has been an important piece of communications and really your global perspective, your perspective as a company, it should have been. Over the summer, it really came to a head, and there were very intense moments and continue to be tense moments that affect your employees and associates, whether you realize it or not, and that impacts your business. And then very timely, right, as we're 2 weeks from the election, it's been a political season unlike any other, and that has an impact not only on your individuals, but as businesses, it's going to impact regulation. You may have uncertainty. There's certainly the economy and how that has affected our landscape and really just the risk tolerance and management as we lead our businesses through this. So certainly, these are just 3 things. There may be other things that impacted your people or your business this year, but we all understand that 2020 will be one for the record books, and certainly we're living history in the moment. And so I want you to think about, how do these things, these on the slide and others, how does that impact your employees? And then what does that mean for their work, for your organization, for the future trajectory of your company? And while that seems really weighty and large, remember, employees are people. So I tell my team all the time, we bring our whole selves to work. Your people bring their entire selves with them to their roles, and they need communication to feel considered and connected to their work. It's really critical. So while, all of us, I think, intellectually understand the value of communication, we get that, clear communication is needed. We'd like to make the argument that it is not just conceptually needed, it is tangibly an important tool for your organization that can be measured in some pretty key metrics. So again, this is from Gallup, but wanted to share, these are some tangible ways that communicating with your employees and leading to employee engagement, making sure that you're focused on that. Here's what it does for your organization. It leads to more productivity, better quality work, better employee well-being, less employee turnover, more profitability, and more customer loyalty. So this is the point in an interactive conversation, right? If we're in the same room, I'd love to talk with you guys about, are these metrics that matter to you? As an entrepreneur, as a CEO, these are metrics that matter to me. In conversations with Aaron and the JPI team and our other clients, I know that these are metrics that matter to them. And so our assumption is these are things that would be valuable to your organization as well. So I want you to think about, in 2020, there's a full spectrum of experience, whether your organization went through a couple of reductions in force, potentially. Maybe there was a significant change to your business plan or strategy. Potentially, sales may have shifted downward. If that's the case, your people who remain are doing potentially twice as much with half as much resource, right? And there's a need to communicate with them. And on the flip side, there are some businesses and organizations that, they've caught lightning in a bottle this year. There's been opportunity for them to grow and to scale and to harness this moment in time to really bring something to the market that's needed. And maybe you've doubled in size, and that's fantastic. But for those of us who have grown quickly, we understand that that also comes with challenges, right? If you're twice as large, that means there are now employees in your organization who may not be connected to the culture. They may not understand your processes and how you do things as a company. And so communication is important for you as well. It's critical that you're connecting with your people and making sure you're all on the same page. And the results are these business impacts. So with that, what does it look like in action? Now Erin's going to show us how employee engagement has contributed to JPI, both at mountaintop moments for the company and then in the challenges of a global pandemic. So at this time, I will hand it over to Erin, and forgive us, we're going to swap presenter status. So I'll go ahead and stop, and Erin, you can go ahead and jump in.
Yes, I am sharing my screen. Oops. Give me a moment. Okay, can everyone see that slide, Communicate with Purpose? Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. To kind of reintroduce myself, I'm Erin Allen, the Corporate Communications Manager here at JPI. As Jeff mentioned, I'm originally from upstate New York. I moved here about 6 years ago and have lived in East Dallas ever since. For the past 5 of those years, I've been at JPI in a couple of different roles, but primarily this communications role. My job and duties kind of primarily revolve around, obviously, the PR and communication side of things, but I also have a unique opportunity because under my umbrella, I also keep kind of the employee relations, recognition, empowerment, all under my kind of sphere of influence. So my team and I, we kind of call ourselves the culture keepers. It's a job that we take very seriously, but whether we're communicating with people and saying exactly what we do, who we are, and what our plans are, or reaching out to our associates, engaging them, empowering them, recognizing them for the awesome industry leaders that they are, we are promoting that culture, and we are trying to communicate the JPI way, and that they are very much a part of the JPI family. As Amanda mentioned, and I think we both agree that the primary focus for us today is to prioritize you and your organizations, to give you tangible tools and resources to be able to go home and come back to work tomorrow and implement something new or spark a new idea within your organization. To do that, I do think it's important to give you just a little bit of background on JPI and use JPI as a case study, if you will, so that when you are thinking and brainstorming about your own organizations and different initiatives, you can pull on that context and some of the successes that JPI has had, and maybe even some of the lessons learned too. So it's important to kind of get that background of JPI, and I always like to start as soon as you walk in the door. You're faced with our culture and tradition, mission and creed, owners' values, our goal, and our guiding principles. And as soon as you walk in the door, whether you're an employee, whether you're a partner in business, whether you're a potential partner in business, you know exactly who we are. It's hitting you right in the face. It's literally carved in granite right outside of our are opening doors. And it really sets the tone for how we do business and who we see ourselves as professionals and as human beings. It tells people a lot about how we do business and how we expect business to be done, again, whether you're an associate, whether you're an employee, whether you're a partner in business. I think it's probably good to shift and tell you a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what we do. So JPI is a multifamily developer and builder. We build apartment homes in the area. We have a 30-year history in DFW and about a 20-year history in Southern California. We're pretty unique in the fact that, and something I really love about JPI is we can't really get anything done without our partners in business. So whether we're reaching out to municipalities and city councils to try and get their trust and buy-in in breaking dirt in their community, whether we are partnering with banks to try and get our job sites up and running and get those loans closed, whether we are reaching out to our property management teams who are our boots on the ground and third-party property management teams to run and be the lifeblood of each of our apartments, or whether we are asking for the trust and ownership of a possible new owner that we're going to sell one of our properties to. We have to rely on that culture of transparency, integrity, of that reputation of being a straight shooter, of being people who have those values and that you can really trust your investment in. Without those relationships, we can't really go far. We also really put a focus on our people. Our people are our number one asset. We believe that we have an organization of industry leaders, but we very much believe that they don't walk in the door on day one in an entry level or mid-level position and show up as an industry leader. It is our mission, it's our duty, it's our privilege to be able to foster an environment of growth, of transparency, and a learning environment that allows these people to really take control over their careers and want to stay and want to foster a culture that I'm sharing in the success that JPI has each and every day. We have a unique business model for a couple of different reasons. The first reason I'll get into in a little bit, but really just focuses around our varying internal audiences, just talking about our employees themselves. Second, we have both very specific milestones and transactions, property starts, groundbreakings or property sales that need to be communicated quickly and clearly and in a transparent way. But we also need to keep our people in touch with our long-term business goals that might affect the team, their day-to-day operations, so on and so forth. Our goal is always to, equip them with the knowledge to lead their teams and to plan for their teams. Doing this really does two things, a couple of things. It educates your employees on just the nuts and bolts of what your operations are and what your plans are. But more importantly, it allows them to buy into your business plan, to buy into the goals that you have set for the company, and to play a personal role in that company's success. So you have a lot of people that work for your organization and you've gone through the interview process and you've identified them as somebody you want to work for you. Well, those are typically people, integritous people who want to come in every day, be fulfilled and get their job done. And you can rely on that and have a wonderful organization made up of some great people. But if you can tap into their internal identifiers of what success is and have them share in that, you've now motivated them and fulfilled them on a whole new level, and it taps into their personal goals. Now, I know everyone has their home, family goals, their 5-year plan and social goals and all of that, but you'd be remiss if you didn't understand that there are people who have real serious career goals and aspirations, and that they want an opportunity to tap into that and squeeze into the organization and be fulfilled in that sector as well. So when you can really share in that success, I think that's a special thing, and it creates people who want to be there for a career rather than just the interim. So breaking down our internal audiences, and again, these are just our employees, starting with the corporate office. This is, we are in Las Colinas in the Irving area in DFW if you're local. And these people are made up of our DFW employees, so our development acquisitions teams, high level construction folks. We have asset management, all dedicated to that central region portfolio. But then also we have our services teams. So that would be me, operations, communications, legal, HR, financial services, et cetera. And these people service the entire organization, whether you're in the corporate office or not. These people typically feel the most connected. They work in the same office as our C-suite, and there is a definite advantage to that. There's a mentality that you get the news first and that you're first to hear and first to see and breathe everything. And it's my job to make that not the case and to dispel those myths and to outreach to the entire organization. Moving on to our Western Region office, it's located in San Diego, not the worst place to work and not the worst place to go to visit a remote office. But they are made up of the development, acquisitions teams, again, asset management, high-level construction, all of those folks that are really targeted on our Western Region efforts. So all of the projects and communities that we build in the Southern California area. They are probably a tier down. So they are in that office setting. They do feel connected to each other, but do they feel as connected to, you know, our C-suite members as those people in the corporate office? You could completely understand why they might feel that level of separation. So maybe a step down in that connection, right? And then lastly, our field teams. So these are our men and women scattered across DFW and Southern California in construction trailers. So they report each day, not to a traditional office, but to a construction trailer. And they supervise and oversee all the various subcontractors and trades that we have on site at any given time. And as you can imagine, if somebody is 50 miles from the corporate office in a construction trailer, or 5 states over from the corporate office in a construction trailer, and also separated from that satellite office, it can be difficult to feel that same level of connection that somebody in the corporate office might feel. But that's where I come in and try and unify them and differentiate that messaging, tailor that messaging so they all feel valued. But that's the challenge. And I think that no matter what you all and what industries you're in and what your organizations look like, I think that's what we probably all have in common. How do you unify these people, some of who have never met before, may never meet in their lifetimes, under one mission, one goal, one culture, living in separate cultures themselves, Texas, California, very different states. How do you make them feel connected, informed, valued, no matter where they are? How do you engage them, motivate them day in and day out? Where do you start? Well, for us, I thought it would be good to start with some of the existing platforms that we had in place. Most of these, or all of these, I think were in place before COVID, pre-COVID, but absolutely, and I'll walk through each of them, absolutely every single one of these can be implemented either as is or with some augmentations post-COVID. Starting off with our Blue Diamond internal announcements. So these are our celebratory, newsworthy announcements that go out immediately after a transaction. So we have siphoned these off to just these celebratory moments, to new hires, promotions, transactions, so property starts, property sales, anything that's really tangible like that, awards and accolades that we may have received from different publications in DFW or SoCal, but doing two things. So you're communicating them immediately in a recognizable fashion, and two, you are only designating those to the true top of the hilltop moments, if you will, the really exciting milestones that your company is targeting or is hitting. And that does a couple of things. So that tells people that this is really, really important news. And anytime I see that blue diamond, that recognizable front of that communication, I better perk my ears up and pay attention. And it's probably going to be some pretty exciting and engaging news that I'm going to feel good about as a steward of JPI. Secondly, the JPI news flash. This is kind of more like the want, like you have to communicate it, but it's more of an announcement, less of that celebratory feel. In 2020, COVID has really taken over our JPI news flashes with different procedures, policies, guidelines, state, local guidelines that have been shared by different county judges, things like that. But I think it's really important. We have a couple of different email groups and ways that we segment off our communications, but it's really important to differentiate them. I'm sure you have a lot to share in a year and a lot of information to communicate with your people. And if you're putting that all in the same format, in the same font, and with the same colors and the same look and feel coming from one source, it can be incredibly overwhelming. So it might not look like a blue diamond in a newsflash for you, but it absolutely should be diversified. It should look different, so that at least people can make that filing cabinet in their head and say, okay, well, I know this is exciting news. Well, I know this is a want, but I still need to know it, and kind of organize it in their minds from there. But no matter what, with both of these, that they're happening immediately, breaking news. Moving down to Town Hall, this is our quarterly live stream update. So we have hit you immediately with all of the news that JPI is up to. Now, each quarter, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap that up into a bow, share and remind you of everything that we've done in that quarter in a way that's really fun, exciting, and engaging, no matter if you're 50 miles away in a job site trailer on your cell phone watching our live stream, or if you're joining us live in the corporate office. Now, post 2020, we have definitely struggled and augmented and looked for different ways to incorporate this in the future. But it's as simple as not having that live audience and keeping that social distance and making sure that you're being respectful of all the COVID guidelines that your organization has put in place. And it can be something as simple as a Zoom call. It doesn't need to be a big live stream production. It can be something very low key, just like this. But basically, we would cover two main buckets. So the first one would be covering all your business plan goals, all your transactional items. We like to include kind of a tracker, if you will, or like a gas tank. Here's everything we've done in the first quarter. Where are we to our end of the year, to our fourth quarter goals? I don't know anyone in 2020 who marked out all their goals and then is going to complete them this December. But you better believe that transparency, that shift in what your business plan goals are, if you had to scrap them and start over again, that's all incredibly important to communicate. And so is that ticker, or where you fall for the year. That gives people, again, that shared success, that internal motivation. It takes the macro and it boils it down into the micro for that accountant or that HR generalist to be able to say, here's how I fit into the picture, and here's why what I'm doing matters, and here's how it fits into the larger picture. Second bucket that we focus on is our people. So we update the company on new hires. We share pictures, promotions, work anniversaries, but then we also share personal updates as well. Babies, marriages, wedding anniversaries, if you've purchased a new home, adoptions, anything that your company deems newsworthy, and anything that your employees are really excited and engaged about. And people want to share their news. They want people to know that they are progressing in their lives and in their families and making big decisions. And we all want to feel like those big, capable adults. So, share that out with your teams and make sure that they know what your people are up to. And everybody loves to see a baby. So that's always really helpful. But it does a couple of things. So it makes people feel good, and it makes us feel like more of a family, but it opens up lines of communication with people who would never speak or never think to have anything in common in the first place, right? So when you're reaching out to your accountant or your treasurer, maybe once a week, maybe a couple times a week, and you just need to get the nuts and bolts of the operation done, well, maybe now you have this shared experience, you have this relatable little context, something to break the ice and spark a conversation. You know what they look like, you know where they're located. So sometimes it's as easy as, oh, I saw that person walking through the hall and now I know who they are. You feel a little bit more comfortable about approaching them and saying, hey, Joe, I know that you cover all of our development land acquisition. So I have 10 questions for you. Do you have a minute? By the way, your son is really cute. That definitely opens up, and for people who are introverts, it creates that opportunity to really build that relationship and open up the lines of communication. Lastly, at the end of the year, we boil all of that up and we put it into a sizzle reel, which is our State of the Union. So in most years, JPI would meet or exceed those business goals. 2020, again, is going to look a little bit different, but you will be remiss, even if you share these business goals throughout the year, if they shift, if they change, if you haven't gotten anywhere close, but you've had a couple of successes here or there, you still need to share those moments with your team. Your people have stayed with you through a very difficult time in the world. And it's not fun every day to wake up in 2020 and they're grinding. Sometimes they're working, doing multiple people's jobs and just kind of getting through their day-to-days. And if you don't share in the successes and if you don't communicate that, then out of fear that they might think, well, we didn't meet everything we did, then you're missing out on opportunities to be a mouthpiece for them and the hard work that they've done. And lastly, an employee satisfaction survey. I can't advocate for this enough. We use a company called CEL and Associates, but this can be as simple as a Survey Monkey that you create yourself for free and you send out to your people. For JPI, it looks like soup to nuts, a few questions in every kind of bucket. How are we doing on communications? How are we doing on culture? How are we doing on leadership? Engagement, things like that, provides them an opportunity at every level to give us feedback on how we did. But then the most exciting part of that is the action response team. So what we do each year, we compile people from different areas of the organization, people that normally probably wouldn't collaborate together. And we give them our highest scored questions, things that we've done really great on, and we give them our lowest scored questions, things that we did not do so great on. And we basically give them those questions, and everybody in the organization receives all of the results, but these people receive them kind of with that action and plan. So they get together and they come up with some 2 or 3 things that we are going to focus on for that next year. And Town Hall actually is a really great example of a brain child that came from that action group. So one of our lower scored questions was feeling informed and activated in our business plan goals and knowing where we were in relation to what we had planned and forecasted for the year. And so Town Hall started as literally a conference call and turned into this big live stream production. And yours can look anywhere in between, but the idea that you're going to have some downfalls, some lower points in your organization where you can improve, and to just start doing something is really the place to start there. Forward. It's really easy to, in hindsight is 2020. So it's really easy for me to walk through and say, these are all the wonderful things that worked for my organization. Do these. But I thought it was really important to boil those down into the whys. Why does this work? Why has this been successful for the organization? And I hope that these 4 items will really be the nuggets for you guys to be able to take into your own organizations and figure out what that looks like. First, I've said this many times, but complete transparency in your business goals, no matter if they shift, if they get flopped on the side of their head, if they get completely turned around, if it looks completely different. If you are not sharing that with your people out of fear that it might make them uncertain or insecure, it's not sharing it is going to make them uncertain and insecure. They absolutely need to know what your business plan goals are, even if they shift, and they need to feel bought in and shared in that success with your company. You need to communicate with your people timely and regularly. If you let your organization, especially if it's a smaller one where people feel close and are connected, if you let your organization do the talking and do the narration for you on what's happening, that can be a scary thing. That's something that you don't have control over. It makes people feel that there's something bad or something lurking in the shadows that you don't want to share if you're not communicating that immediately. Absolutely understanding the right tone and the appropriate time to share things is incredibly important as well. And that's where your communications team will come in and help support you in that. But as soon as it's decided that it's ready to share, communicating that is incredibly important. Again, going back to the tangible shared successes. So it's a little easy for JPI because we are actually building product and we go through the life cycle of the deal and we have the tangible successes. But I would encourage you all in your own organizations, if your business model, if your industry doesn't lean toward that, find a way to make the successes tangible. Find a way to set those interim goals. Maybe it's a quarterly goal, maybe it's a monthly goal, and make sure that your people know that that is what the company is striving for. And then when you meet those goals, you pat your people on the back and you give them a mouthpiece for the successes that they've brought to the company. And lastly, you need to constantly pursue and use feedback. I think Amanda will speak on this in a little bit, but it's really scary to reach out for feedback, and you have to be prepared to receive it. Sometimes people have a lot to say, sometimes they have not so much to say, but it's really important that you pursue that feedback, but more importantly, you have to put it into action. You have to put your money where your mouth is, and if you say, I'm going to send this survey out, well, you better follow up at the end of that survey with the results of it. And here's just a little blurb on what we're going to do and how we're going to take that forward. So I hope that helps kind of boil everything that I've discussed today down. Again, Amanda's going to put this all into a little bit more action for you, but I hope that we can utilize JPI as a case study and help you kind of put that context. So now we can switch gears into what does this look like for your organization. So again, bear with us as we shift the presentations here, but Amanda's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Erin. Okay. So how do we put this into action? Erin has shown us what it looks like for JPI, and JPI is a fairly good sized company. I understand that some of you may have smaller teams, some of you may have international teams. And so let's look at the things that I'm going to present to you are applicable for everyone. So first I want to ask, and again, this is where sometimes that communication is helpful in the presentation, but who leads internal communications? Just very practically, as you think about your organization, who will lead that? Well, I would argue, there are a couple of groups we should look at. So first is your communications and public relations team. Certainly, these are the people who have the experience, the knowledge in how to execute. They will be incredibly helpful to you in strategy, because you do need to have a plan in how you roll out communications to your employees or associates. But they're one piece of the puzzle. Another team that is really important to keep in the loop is human resources. So this team is critical because, one, they know what needs to be communicated. They understand your people and the things that they're worried about or thinking about, or relevant, issues that need to be addressed. And most importantly, potentially, is they understand the regulations and guidelines that are needed for compliance, and they can be incredibly helpful to you as you are crafting these communications to make sure that you are within the bounds and aligned to requirements that we just, quite honestly, many of us have legally to consider. And the third is executive leadership. So this is, it may be the C-suite of your company. It can reach to your vice presidents or senior vice presidents. And this group is important because they are the leaders. They're who people are looking to for guidance and direction. And if they are not present in communications, it is painfully noticeable. So it's critical that all three of these groups work together. And for an organization that may be, established and around for a long time. One challenge that larger organizations may have are silos. And quite honestly, you need boundary spanners in your organization who can help lead this collaboration effort. It has to be all three of these groups for it to work well. On the flip side, if you are a nimble nonprofit or organization that has a smaller team, there may be a couple of these roles that overlap, and that's fine. But you need whoever is communicating with your people, they need to be thinking from each of these angles to make sure that you're giving holistic, robust communication to people that will really be effective. Communication starts at the top. Leadership sets the tone. People want to see from their leaders. They want to hear from their leaders. They look to the C-suite for attitude, direction, confidence. So what does this look like? Your senior leaders need to be present in intro letters, introductions. If there is communication that goes out, it needs to come from, it doesn't necessarily have to be written by, but it needs to come from your top leaders. Town halls. Brad Taylor at JPI, the CEO, leads the town halls that Erin's talking about at JPI. That's really important for those people to be out in front, to not only be seen, but also to have the interaction with your employees, to answer questions, to be accessible and available. Open office hours are possible, potentially. Weekly video updates. We had a client who every week their CEO would live stream on Workplace, which is Facebook's version of an intranet, and he would answer questions from associates in real time. He'd give company updates. It was brief. It was probably 15 minutes. It wasn't heavily produced, but it is a way for him to connect with his associates all over the world. And get that real-time feedback. So you can get creative with it, but just look for opportunities to connect your senior leaders with the entire team. It's really important. So what tools do you need? Well, there are 4 that I want to talk with you about now. There are some other things that certainly we can talk offline about, but I want you to consider these 4 things. So the first is language and representation. It's important, particularly as your employees, your associates are diverse. They represent different cultures, different communities. Certainly you have a diverse employee base. And so it's critical that you are using inclusive and collaborative language. You have to have an expert on your team who is thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and helping your team lead on how to connect with all people, to make sure that your messages are not falling flat, that you are not potentially saying or doing something that might turn someone off or upset someone. Because at the end of the day, you want your message to be received. And so it's important that you are setting those communications up for success by making sure that you are appropriate, that you're sensitive, that you are mindful. I would also say it's important to remember that communication is not just words. It's also the images that you use, the photography, the videos that you use. Make sure that it's representative of your company culture, that you're not just thinking about things like diversity in terms of kind of what the typical US conversation is about race and gender. Those are incredibly important, but you should also be thinking across the span of your organization. Not only are your leaders represented, but do you see field staff? Do you see people from different regions? Are there people from different teams? That's critical as well. What you want to do in your communication is make sure that your people can see themselves in the message and in the visuals. As Erin said, it's critical that you connect them to your cause and the work that you're doing. They have to see themselves in that to be able to connect themselves. The next is culture pulse. You need to understand your people, understand your organization. What are those core values? If your organization does not have your core values, literally etched in stone when you walk off the elevator, which is awesome, you need to internalize those as a communicator. You need to make sure that those come through in your communication. Address issues head on, be transparent, make sure that you are mindful about information as you share it, but that you are not holding back on things that your team wants to hear about. Inventory platforms, there are 1 million channels that you can use to communicate. There are so many ways that you can share a message. It's critical that you don't try to do them all. Really pick the ones that work for your team. It may mean if you have a field staff that is not in front of email, you may have posters and printed materials that are shipped to a physical location. On the flip side, you may have a company force that's out, traveling to clients a lot. Consider an internal podcast. That might be a great way to share information with them that's easily digestible and fits into their process. Or you may have team members who are at their desk in front of email all day. So maybe that's something to consider. It's important to know that there's no one size fits all process for this. So think about what works for your company. And then measurement. Give your people vehicles for feedback. You need to set processes in place so they can easily give you information, whether it's a generalized email that goes to your HR communications team, it's regular surveys like Erin said. They need to know that if they have something to say, it's a two-way conversation, right? Communication is not just pushing things out to someone, it's having a dialogue. So make sure that you have vehicles for them to share. Be ready to hear their side. When you ask for employee feedback, they will give it to you. And it's not always fun to hear. And that's okay, because what you're doing is you're creating a comfortable space where they feel ownership of the organization. That's a beautiful thing for your business. It can lead to incredible, tangible business results. But you need to understand as a leader and as a team that it's not always going to be easy. Commit to action. You can't just ask them what they think or feel or share information with them and then not use that to move forward. Make sure that when you are doing things, when you're asking them for things, when you're sharing information, that you're constantly taking their feedback and information and folding it into the future communications that you put together. So how can you do this in your organization? Here is a communications process that you might think about. In our world, we talk about work your plan. So this is something, and I know Jeff said that you all can access these slides afterwards. So you might take this and think about, how do you work in your organization through this process? Survey your people and find out what they need or what they think. Evaluate their feedback. Turn that into measurable objectives that will, you can set what does success look like in communicating with your people. Evaluate those channels that work for them. Define and execute those milestones, put it into place, and then benchmark your results and keep surveying your people. It's all a constant circle, it never ends. But if you put this into place in your organization, you will see an impact for sure. So I'll leave you with 3 things you can do today, just very practically speaking. Take inventory of your communications process. Again, we'll share this graphic with you. Really think about each of these steps, how you need to be sharing information internally. Step 2, measure your communications effectiveness. Ask your people, what information do they need? What information really sticks for them? How do they feel? Get that information. And then step 3, evaluate if you need to add, edit, or eliminate channels based on their effectiveness. It's a constant process, but you can start today, whether you already have an internal communications campaign or program, and you just need to take it to the next level, or if you don't really communicate with your people at all. These are 3 things you can do this afternoon in an hour to get started. And I would argue, and I think Erin would too, that it would be worth your time to do that. So I know we just have a few minutes left, but are there any questions that you all have for us? And Jeff, I think there are some in the chat box. So hopefully we can at least get to a few of them.
Yes. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Erin. And if you all have questions, please post them in the chat. We'll try to get through a couple of them here. Let me start off by asking you all about frequency of communication. How often should you be communicating with employees? And especially when we're not virtual, obviously we're all virtual right now, so that's the only way we can communicate. but how do you balance the in-person versus electronic communications?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is it depends on the context, right? So I have an example. I heard the head of communications from Delta Airlines in a presentation that, before COVID, they surveyed their employees a lot. And before COVID, their employees said, "You are communicating too much. We're getting too much from you, and it's overload." And then COVID happened. That, I think those results were maybe early 2020, right, where they heard that from their team. And then COVID happened, and they made a conscious decision not to scale back, but to ramp up their communication because of what was happening. And after surveying their people over time, their people were grateful for that, because in a time of uncertainty, I would argue that communication is the lifeline that gives people confidence. It helps them to understand what's happening as much as you can share what's happening. Information is power for people. And it also, to Aaron's point, if you're not talking about what's going on, people will make up what's happening, right? And they'll start spreading that to each other. And it may fuel more uncertainty and doubt, when really you want them to feel taken care of and confident and believe that their leadership is has it under control. So I would say in a situation like this, more is probably okay. And just keep your finger on the pulse of it, and keep checking with your people. Ask them, do you feel like you get the information that you need? Are these channels working? And that's how you kind of can gauge. It's an art more than a science, though.
And I think I would just add a little bit onto that. If you are a leader of your organization, or if you are going to advocate these types of communications to a leader in your organization, I think it's important that it's consistent. So the last thing you want is, oh, the CEO is doing a video call. Are we all getting fired, or is something terrible happening? You never want your people to associate you with bad news, or with, events that are unpopular, decisions that are unpopular, if you will. So I think once your leadership team, or once your communications team does decide on this cadence, and again, I will say with Amanda that it is pretty unique to each organization, stick to it. Maybe even communicate it ahead of time. Our CEO is going to do a Zoom call each month at the end of the month and just talk through successes, but make sure they have an expectation of what's going to happen, so that when they get that invite, they're not like, oh man, what's happening, right? It needs to be consistent.
Thanks very much. One other real quick question before we wrap everything up. We've all heard stories of folks who have started new roles during COVID-19 and have never even met their coworkers. How do you get those people acclimated and really buying into the company culture?
Yeah, that's really a unique situation, isn't it? And before 2020, I don't know that we would have even thought that you would hire people and never meet them, at least for a while. So I think that, you get creative about how you onboard people. Again, video calls, I think there is something to FaceTime, getting to see people, set up some informal kind of meet and greets. Think about how you would do that in a typical office, right? Where you would set appointments with different people that they need to get to know. Encourage some of that social interaction for them. But I think that you've got to be the one, if you're hiring, it's your job to make those connections for them, at least initially, and then encourage them to keep doing that. Because at the end of the day, if you're brand new, you don't even know who to reach out to get to know, right, who's what and what your purpose is and how you fit into the bigger picture. So I would say set up those calls, check in with them frequently. If you need to do, regular meetings with them, just to make sure that they are comfortable and have a vehicle for feedback, that's pretty important. But it is about relationships. So keep that in mind, and then be creative about, how would I do this in the real, in normal times? How can I translate that virtually with as much human element as possible?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Aaron. That was an excellent presentation. A lot of information to digest. Sorry we didn't have a chance to ask more questions, but we want to be sensitive to our 1 o'clock deadline. So we will keep this line open for networking. Amanda and Aaron, as a token of our thanks, will be making a donation to the North Texas Food Bank in your honor and in honor of all of our speakers for our fiscal year. So thank you very much.